Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, we discuss whether or not the Max Kepler signing is enough for the Phillies outfield. Spoiler alert, I don't think so.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me for some of my other work in the Philadelphia sports talk space. I've been on the air, 97.5 The Fanatic on the radio, talking Philly sports for 5 years. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 years, and this is my third season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to this in podcast form. If you're checking us out on YouTube and you've yet to hit subscribe on the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel, what are you waiting for? Go ahead and do that. It'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel because right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Now, the Phillies have made a move. Real quick, before we get into that, I do want to say thank you very much for bearing with me during a couple of days of not being able to post. I mentioned before I had some family stuff going on. I had to go down to Atlanta for unfortunately, for a family funeral. So back, going to be a content machine the rest of the year, so don't worry about that. We're going to be getting stuff out, and I also made sure to say what's up to all those Braves fans and remind them who's the top dog in the division right now. Anyway, but the Phillies, in order to remain the top dog and win the NL East again this year, they're going to have to make some changes. They are. It's not just going to be run it back and set it and forget it and everything's good. No. And one of those changes is going to have to be outfield play because the outfield was clearly the weakness of this team. So they went out and signed Max Kepler to a 1-year, $10 million contract. We're going to start by breaking down kind of who Max Kepler is. Then we're going to talk about what his role on the Philadelphia Phillies team in 2025 is going to be, because that's up for debate. And then we're going to take a look at this whole narrative about running it back and what counts, because people are very unhappy with the Philadelphia Phillies offseason right now. Or I guess I should say very tentatively unhappy. It's like, if they don't do more, I'm not pleased. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a silly thing to say in December, on December 20th. That would be like if your girlfriend came to you on January 10th and said, hey, if you don't do something for Valentine's Day for me this year, I'm going to be so annoyed with you. And guess what, babe? I got a lot of time. I'll be all right. We'll plan something. Take a deep breath. It's a little early. So anyway, we'll get into that as well. But the big thing is the Phillies signed Max Kepler. And is it enough, right? Is this signing enough for the Philadelphia Phillies outfield to be markedly improved in 2025? The short answer is I don't think so. I really don't. And this isn't a major knock on who Max Kepler is as a player, but the Phillies had a pretty darn good set of outfielders on paper, right? You had the speedster, Yohan Rojas in center field, who's a great defensive player, not great offensively. You had the righty all-star and Nick Castellanos in right field, who is good defensively in what he's asked to do. And while he's not the most consistent hitter, you could say that again, when he gets hot, he is one of the hottest hitters on planet Earth. He can really, really contribute to a team. And he had a really solid campaign in 2024. And then left field, you had Brandon Marsh. And Brandon Marsh is kind of the interesting key to this whole thing, where if he hits at a plus major league level, like people believe he can, if he works some stuff out, the strikeout stuff out, then he could hold the whole outfield together by giving you that strong lefty bat. But that didn't happen for Brandon Marsh in 2024. And then Nick Castellanos started off the season slow. And Yohan Rojas was good, but not good enough for his offensive deficiencies in the power category and the average category and kind of everything. He started getting picked off. And the outfield turned into a really what would have been viewed as a disaster if the team wasn't so hot coming out of the gates, because the infield was unbelievable and the pitching was unbelievable and the bullpen was unbelievable. So the outfield was the number one concern as far as a skill discrepancy last year. The Phillies go out and they sign Max Kepler. Now, who is he, right? That's the first thing. He spent his whole career with the Minnesota Twins in the American League. So if you're not familiar with Max Kepler and you're just a Phillies fan, you just watch him play the teams they play in the National League most of the time, like, I totally get it. But there is some major upside to Max Kepler as a player. German-born, which is very interesting. You don't see that very often. Cool to see a guy from Europe still extending his major league career. He's already had a 10-year Major League Baseball career, 31 years of age, going to be turning 32 this upcoming season. So he's not like in his prime, but he's still got potentially good years ahead of him. And he's had some monster seasons at points in his career. Let's take you back to 2019. He was actually 20th in the MVP voting in 2019 in Minnesota. Listen to some of these numbers. Batted .252, slugged slugged .519 on base percentage of .336. I was going to say .336 slugging wouldn't be that great, especially when he hit 36 home runs that year, had 90 RBIs. Now, he struck out 99 times, but he had 36 home runs. You'll take that. He also had 60 walks. So a pretty darn good season in 2019 where Max Kepler was compared to guys like Aaron Judge as like premier power hitters. Now, 1 year doesn't make you Aaron Judge. That dude does it every year. And I would never compare him. I'm just saying like the comparisons were made. Right now, I'm not telling you got if he puts a good year together, Aaron Judge. Like, no, that's not where his ceiling's at. His ceiling is below that, I firmly believe. But you could see that he could have like a plus season. Let's go to 2023, significantly more recent. Not as great of a year, but one that was still pretty darn impressive. He batted .260. He slugged .484. He walked only 45 times and struck out 106 times, but 24 homers, 66 RBIs, 22 doubles, over 100 hits, 114 hits. I mean, that was a pretty impressive season right there. Now, what's interesting about Max Kepler is the strikeout numbers, right? This is what really is. We talked about Brandon Marsh as the key to the Philadelphia Phillies outfield and how he could have made this a lot simpler if he just didn't strike out a billion times last year. Well, we're going to talk about Max Kepler's role coming up and where he's going to slide in. But whatever case, one of the major issues that fans are going to have with any signing, and I guess rightfully so, right? Strikeouts are not good for your team. Now, I think we're going to get a little overly sensitive to strikeouts because of how they've affected the Phillies in the postseason, which might not be fair to players like Max Kepler who weren't on those teams. But when you look at strikeouts, they're going to be a focal point for the organization and for the fan base in 2025. The Kepler strikeout numbers are weird, right? So in 2018 and 2019, or let's go back to 2017, struck out 114 times in 2017. And then in 18, he struck out 96 times. And in 19, he struck out 99 times while having an exceptional season. Plus power hitter, got that all done. That's pretty darn good. We can skip 2020 because that's the shortened season, but he struck out 36 times there, which is probably about on pace for what he was doing before. Then he had 96 again in 2021. And then in 2022, that number dropped to 66. And then it ballooned to 106 in 2023. And then it dropped to 80 in 2024, but he had about 100 less plate appearances. So he doesn't seem to me to be, right, a 100 strikeout guy. He's only cleared that mark twice in his career. Now, the other times he's come close, but when you talk about a 90 strikeout guy or an 80 strikeout guy compared to a 100 strikeout guy, it's not a huge margin, but aesthetically, it just looks a little bit better to add that guy. And my biggest question for Kepler, because last year he had a really bad year in 2024, which is why he was available and why he was available at a 1 year, $10 million price for a guy that could be a plus power hitter, especially in Citizens Bank Park, and at a position of need for the Philadelphia Phillies in the outfield. By the way, defensively, while we're saying position of need, wherever he ends up, the guy's a solid defender. Think slightly better than Nick Castellanos, right? He's not going to make any crazy plays. He's not going to do like what Yohan Ross does in center, but he can field his position, right? He can be an above average defensive outfielder, slightly above average. Never going to win a gold glove, but he's never really going to look like Kyle Schwarber did out there. But last year was a miserable year. And he had injuries, major issues. He only played in 105 games last year for the Minnesota Twins. It was just a nightmare 2024, which could be, that's the thing, could be a benefit for the Philadelphia Phillies. It could mean, hey, this guy just had a bad year and he's got more in the tank. It could be at 31 years of age. That was a sign of this dude's over the hill. And listen, my brother is a Minnesota Twins fan, right? So I've actually had him on the podcast here before. talked to me all the time about Max Kepler back in the day. I remember him talking about him in 2019, saying how good he was. And now he's like, oh, this guy stinks. Good luck with him. He's going to roll over to second base every at bat, and I get it. But he's a scorned lover because Max Kepler's no longer with his team. Max Kepler's a bit of a boomer bust guy, which doesn't exactly break the narrative of Philadelphia Phillies hitters being boomer bust. And it's not ideal compared to what you'd like to see them bring in if that's something you're anti, but he's a player that is going to be more consistent at the plate than Brandon Marsh. That's the most important thing. Max Kepler, better offensive player than Brandon Marsh at this point. Max Kepler, solid defensive player, probably a lesser defensive player than Brandon Marsh. So you're trading defense for offense if indeed Max Kepler ends up in left field, but will he? And is that what the Phillies want to do with him? Well, we'll discuss that coming up next because we're going to talk about Max Kepler's potential role with the Philadelphia Phillies as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But let's talk about FanDuel first because, man, you know what's coming up, right? The NFL postseason, the playoffs. They're right around the corner. They're almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can finish the season strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up a W. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. Like, that's my anytime touchdown player bets are my favorite. I love them. Just pick a running back. Pick them at probably like slightly plus money. If you see a team with two running backs and you know one guy's bigger bodied, go with that guy. You're going to get good odds. They're probably going to score. I mean, go ahead and check that out. And not only can you bet on who will win the game, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will go over on their yardage, how many points each team will score, or the combined total of points in the game, so much more. So go ahead and check it out. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so let's talk about what Kepler's role on this team could be and should be. And we're going to have to live in a couple different spots here, right? We're going to have to live in ideal and realistic. That's what I always try and do, because anybody could sit down here and say, well, ideally he's the backup to whoever in left field, and you get another all-star level player in here, and then Brandon Marsh is the backup. Like, okay, we have to be realistic. It's not just forced trades on, forced signings on. Hey, this guy's still available, so I want him, so it's going to be him. Like, not how it works. Let's exist in the world that the Phillies exist in right now, right? So ideally, I think people would want to see Max Kepler as a rotational outfield player. I don't think that's what he is, but I think that would be ideal based on the strikeout issues, based on the power ability. I think it'd be cool to see him split time with a guy like Brandon Marsh in left field. And if Yohan Rojas could hit at a consistent major league level and you're able to go ahead and split time with those two guys, you're going to be looking at a situation where you could make something work out there. Now, they're both lefty bats, him and Brandon Marsh. So maybe the platoon is better, him and Rojas. I don't know. But the lefty bat is interesting because that means you could also look at potentially playing him in right field over Nick Castellanos in certain circumstances. So bringing in another lefty bat that you could trust, that was definitely part of the equation here, which the Phillies didn't really have that lefty outfield bat that they felt good about last year at a consistent major league hitting level. So that really benefits the Philadelphia Phillies. What will his role be on the team? That makes it more complicated, though, that he's a lefty. Now, my best guess is going to be that Max Kepler right now, right, barring any further moves, which there certainly could be. I'm not saying, the Phillies are done in the outfield. Max Kepler is this right now. But if the season started tomorrow, I would expect that Max Kepler will trot out and play starting left field for the Philadelphia Phillies. You'd have Yohan Rojas playing starting center field for the Philadelphia Phillies. And in right field, it would be Nick Castellanos. That would be my estimate of what the Phillies outfield would look like. Now, where does that leave Brandon Marsh? It leaves him as a platoon player in center field and potentially in right field if Nick Castellanos ever wants to take a day off. Now, Castellanos played all 162 last year. I don't know if that's going to be something that we see happen again in 2025. Like, I just don't think it's realistic to expect that to happen 2 straight seasons, even though it sounds like Nick Castellanos would love for that to be the case. So you could use Max Kepler a bunch of different places other than starting left fielder. Now, you're never going to use him as DH. Some teams might, but the Philadelphia Phillies won't, because Kyle Schwarber is locked into that spot until he decides, or the organization decides that they don't want him here anymore. So that split happens. Kyle Schwarber is your designated hitter. So that takes that off the board for Max Kepler. He's going to play outfield somewhere, so there's no like infield spots. They're like, oh, could he play third base if Alec Boehm gets – no, he's not going to do that. So you're looking at left, center, or right, and left seems to be the most likely because left is the weakest spot with – well, not the weakest spot, right? Center field is the weakest spot offensively because Rojas doesn't have a semblance of power, like not even one iota of major league power right now in his game. But center defensively is a position where you need a plus-plus guy, and Max Kepler is not a plus-plus guy. Marsh is a better defender. Rojas is a better defender. So Kepler, Freudian slip. Let's not go back to the Gabe Kapler years. Kepler is going to be a corner outfielder on this team, and I think he's going to be the everyday starter in left field, and then the platoon will be Marsh and Rojas in center. Lefty-righty makes total sense. And then you could also like have a little bit more variability where you play Kepler for Castellanos, and then you move Marsh over, and at least you have like a true major league hitter out there in the outfield. Like, because if Nick Castellanos had missed a game and you had played, I don't know, let's say Cody Clemens or Weston Wilson and Brandon Marsh and Johan Rojas in the outfield, that's not sustainable. In this case, let's say something happens to Castellanos. If you played Kepler and Marsh and Rojas, it's more sustainable. It's not exactly ideal. So I think his role right now is starting left fielder, though. And is that good enough? To me, no. To me, if you tried out a lineup that has the outfield of Kepler, Rojas, Castellanos on opening day, that's potentially going to look like more of the same. That's not a guarantee. Now, it could be a significantly better year for Kepler, and he's better than Brandon Marsh at the dish right now. That's almost a stone cold lock, right? But it could be just as bad as last year. Kepler goes into a bunch of strikeouts, can't produce the power he needs to. Rojas is not going to produce that power. Castellanos is streaky, and you could have a rough start to the season in the outfield again. So I don't know. I could see why people call this an underwhelming move. I think Max Kepler's a nice baseball player, right? I do. And at his best, he could be a big-time signing for the Philadelphia Phillies. But at his worst, which we just saw in 2024, mind you, which should scare people a little bit, he could be Brandon Marsh Part 2 a little bit, just with more groundouts instead of strikeouts. And that doesn't really move you any closer. Like, that doesn't get you much closer to another level, another tier of team. Now, I don't know if the Philadelphia Phillies need to get to another tier of team. We're going to talk about that coming up when you talk about what do you count as running it back. Like, I think it's such an arbitrary term, and I think people are using it as a catch-all, and we're going to talk about that for the Philadelphia Phillies offseason, and maybe I'm just being sensitive to what people are saying because it's early, and I think it's crazy that people are making grand proclamations. But I will make this grand proclamation right now. If the outfield does not see another player added, you're in for most likely more of the same in 2025 that you had in 2024, which was underwhelming outfield play. Max Kepler cannot be the only answer for this team in the outfield. He just cannot be. And I don't know that he will. Right now, I'd say it's probably a coin flip that the Phillies add another impact player in the outfield. I'm not saying like a depth piece. I'm saying like, I don't know, Jerkson Profar or something like that. Teoscar Hernandez. Now, I don't think those things are happening. But my point is a guy whose name you recognize that has been a plus major league player at some point in his career. Unless you do that, I'm not convinced that the outfield is going to be in a great spot. And if Max Kepler is one of your starting outfielders, that doesn't exactly scream to me that you've made a market improvement over last year. It just doesn't. I got to be honest with you. That's not the ideal situation to be in if you're the Philadelphia Phillies, when you're seeing teams add Juan Soto and Kyle Tucker and Cody Bellinger and guys of that magnitude. Anthony Santander is still out there. Teoscar Hernandez is still out there. Jerkson Profar is still out there. Max Kepler doesn't exactly move the needle that those guys would have. Now, the Phillies, we've talked about this. A lot of their moves this offseason are going to be in the margins. It's going to be guys that can be a slight improvement here that you don't spend too much on that could give you big-time returns, right? This feels not quite like the Jordan Romano trade, but somewhat in a similar vein, somewhat in a similar vein where Jordan Romano is a guy that had a bunch of injuries in 2024, major upside in past seasons, signed him to a lucrative one-year deal. and you see if he can go ahead and earn his money going forward after this season with a strong bounce back year in Philadelphia. Kepler, injuries last year, rough performance, has had some good performances and good years in the past. You end up signing him to a 1-year, $10 million deal, so you're not on the hook long term. So I don't mind the terms of the contract, and I don't care about the money. It's monopoly money anyway. There's no salary cap. So whatever you need to do to get done with the players that you want to have in here, it's not like another Taijuan Walker situation. Like if this dude stinks, he's more Whit Merrifield than Taijuan Walker, just cut him. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying cut Max Kepler before the dude's even put on a jersey probably, but I'm just saying, like, you're not implicated long-term with this guy. It just looks like you have some upside potentially on a contract year because it's a 1-year deal for both of those players. And if they play up to that and you can develop guys and they buy into the culture and you believe that in Philadelphia players can improve based on playing with a winning organization, well, you could have a home run. I don't like to play in coulds. I'd rather give myself something more definite, and the Philadelphia Phillies signing of Max Kepler does not definitely give you anything, which is kind of a harsh way to say it, but I think a fair way to say it until we see what this guy looks like on the field. So those are my thoughts on the Max Kepler signing. I do want to round out with this, though. Like, what do you consider running it back? What do you count as running it back? Because I've had some tough arguments with people about what running it back is and why I don't think we're in a situation where they're necessarily doing it. But I'll explain that coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. All right, let's talk about Game Time first. Game Time is awesome, and Game Time is focused on togetherness this holiday season. That means when you bring people together at live events, the experience is that much better. And guess what? It's the perfect gift. You could give, like, your mom a pair of pot holders or something, or you could give your dad, I don't know, a nice Christmas tie. But are they really going to, like, remember that? Or are they going to remember when you took them to that sporting event, or that concert, or that comedy show, or that theater performance, the arts, the sports? They move the emotions. They give experiences. You're going to walk out of somewhere you bought Game Time tickets for and say, wow, that was special. Beats the heck out of a Christmas tie or a pot holder. That's why Game Time should be your place to check out for gifts this holiday season. Plus, they have Game Time picks, which filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time going through thousands of tickets like that. You know, they got the all-in pricing, so you can see what the full price is going to be with the fees up front, and not anything piled on at the end that surprises you. You can get panoramic view from your seats before you buy. You get the lowest price guarantee, or they'll credit you 110% of your money back. You find seats in the same row and section for less. Your tickets are covered by the Game Time ticketing coverage, which is one of the best in the business. I mean, take the guesswork out of buying tickets this holiday season with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONMLB. You'll even get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Whew, you know it's game time. So here's what's interesting to me. There are a lot of people that are talking about, well, the Philadelphia Phillies are running it back again. And the first thing I want you to do is I want you to look around where you're listening to this or where you're watching this. Just take a look around. Maybe you're in your living room. You look over and you see that nice, beautiful pine tree in the corner. Maybe you got a Douglas fir or something like that, or a spruce, and it's all lit up with Christmas lights. Maybe if you're driving, you see one of those stupid cars with the reindeer antlers on it and the little nose on the front, the red nose, to pretend like it's Rudolph. I hate those things. Bottom line is, it is December 20th. It's not even Christmas yet. The offseason is long and long and long, and it gets longer every year with the way the players hold out. Not really like hold out, but like they're finding ways to fight for these bigger and bigger contracts, which take longer and longer to sign. And I know some of the big-name guys have already gone. Most of the big-name guys have already gone this offseason, but it takes time to figure these things out. And there are a lot of moves that can be made. There are a lot still on the table for the Philadelphia Phillies. Alec Bohm has not been traded yet. Nick Castellanos has not been traded yet. Now, they may not be, but they have both been offered in deals recently. No prospects have been traded yet. You haven't made a trade at all, and you have some assets the teams are going to want. The value for Alec Bohm, we talked about it in a recent episode. It might not be what the Phillies originally thought, but there's value. He's not a no-name terrible player. They could still move him. A signing in the pitching staff could happen. The bullpen still needs to be filled out. The outfield still has room for people to fill out. The infield depth could be somewhere where you look to add somebody beside Edmundo Sosa. Now, that's not likely, but my point is this, right? The Philadelphia Phillies are in a spot where it is way, way, way too early to determine whether or not they're running it back, right? Anyone who says, oh, they're doing it again, you're just an alarmist. You're doing it for no reason. It's way too early. Now, if we roll into February and this is all the Phillies have done, and they signed like one or two more middling bullpen arms, then they're running it back. And then we have that conversation. But don't jump the gun. You're giving yourself unnecessary stress around the holidays. The holidays can be stressful enough. They wouldn't be if you use Game Time. Go ahead and check them out. But bottom line is this. You can't jump the gun on determining what an offseason is going to be. And the other thing that I think is unfair is people's definitions of running it back are unfair, because running it back doesn't, to me, mean more of the same with different players. No, different players means different team all the time, every time, every instance. There are different. Listen, I could go out and let's take Ryan Finkelstein, for example, who hosts Locked On Mets. Yeah, I know you're like, why are you bringing up the Mets right now? I guess they were on my mind because of the whole Soto thing. They've been one of the big teams of the offseason. But if we were both professional baseball players and we both went out and we hit 280, and we were both right-handed. I know I'm right-handed. I don't know what he is. But us being on a team, like me being on a team versus him being on a team, would be totally different because we have different personalities and we may interact with players differently and we may have different makeups and we may have different experiences. Like bringing in a player like Max Kepler and simply saying, strikes out too much, rolls over too much, doesn't make strong enough contact consistently enough, he's boom or bust, more of the same. That's just such a harsh, quick label on a guy that you haven't even seen play baseball in a Philadelphia Phillies uniform yet. Like, no, he might look similar to a guy like Nick Castellanos, but when you look at it and you say, okay, let's determine what he's going to be in this lineup because that could change, like that's what you have to do. To me, if you have 3 or more different starters going into the 2025 season, that would not be running it back. Now, that's going to be tough to do because you'll probably have a different starter in left field. What you'd have to do is you'd have to have a different starter at third base, and Alec Boehm would have to be moved because nowhere else in the infield is up for grabs. And then in the outfield, you'd need to do something else in center, and Rojas would have to not be the starter there. But if you did that, I wouldn't consider that running it back. That's 33% of your roster. That is totally different as far as or 33% of your lineup, I would say. That's totally different. Now, 22%, that's still nearly a quarter turnover in starters. That's just if 2 changes. So if they move Alec Boehm, and there's, like, let's say it's Alex Bregman at third base, listen, even that, you're changing significantly. In 2023, your starting infield was Turner and Stott, and you ended up having Harper over there at first base, and you had Alec Boehm at third, and you had JT Realmuto, and your outfield was who? Marsh and Castellanos, and eventually it was Rojas. Like, that was 2023 for the Philadelphia Phillies. And then in 2024, it was all the same guys. Like, who they ended the 2023 season with was basically who they started the 2024 season with. Whit Merrifield was a depth piece, but he wasn't brought in here to be a starter. They made that very, very clear. That's running it back. This is not, you can't just make your own determination of, well, I consider that running it back. If they changed multiple starter positions, that's an argument that can be made that they're not doing that. And if they change 3 starters, well, I'm going to say you're flat out insane if you say that counts as running it back. And also the bullpen's going to be different. They can make an addition to the rotation. Like, everyone just needs to take a deep breath. I've seen so much Phillies angst on Twitter. And I think part of the reason why is here in Philadelphia, we need to get our angst out a little bit. The Flyers don't have expectations right now because they're rebuilding. The Sixers don't have expectations because the whole team's dead. The Eagles, well, they have expectations, but they're crushing all of them. They're winning every darn football game that happens. So the one team that you can have like active angst for right now is the Philadelphia Phillies. So I do kind of feel like in a way this fan base, this city is channeling their frustrations into the Philadelphia Phillies right now because it's dumb to use it on the Sixers because everyone's hurt. It's dumb to use it on the Flyers because that team's not ready to compete. And it's dumb to use it on the Eagles because they're an unstoppable force of nature and probably going to win the Super Bowl. Just my take. We go to Locked On Eagles for that. But bottom line is this. Take a deep breath. Look at the calendar. Look at all the Christmas lights. Enjoy this time of year. Nothing's over yet. The winter meetings basically just happened. And there's a lot still to be determined in the Major League Baseball offseason before we can make a call on what Dave Dombrowski did, what he didn't do. I don't worry about those things coming. We'll have plenty of time in the offseason to react to what they do, and we'll have plenty of time in February to react to what they don't. We'll have all of spring training where we'll look at and we'll say, hey, did he do enough or not? But this ain't spring training. You look outside, we had snow today in Philly. It doesn't feel like spring. Hold your horses. We will get to a time where we can evaluate the offseason more properly. Let's say it that way. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube. All that great stuff that really helps us out here on the Locked On Phillies channel. And I will talk to you next time on our next episode of Locked On Phillies.